Friends, a lot has unfolded in the world, and we're going to dissect it all. Today, we're delving into a critical analysis of Russia's war in Ukraine, an engagement that far surpasses the physical battleground, extending into the realms of economic systems, financial stability, and geopolitical influence. While tanks and missiles seize the headlines, a deeper conflict simmers, a struggle against crippling sanctions, economic hardship, and mounting internal discontent. This battle for resilience showcases Russia's frailties, especially as resources dwindle and global isolation becomes more profound. These unseen dynamics are reshaping the nation's path, providing crucial insights into the far-reaching ramifications of unchecked aggression. Welcome to our channel, where we dig into the narratives shaping global events. If this resonates with you, give us a subscribe, leave your opinions in the comments, and stay with us as we examine how Russia's economic vulnerabilities could influence the war's outcome. Let's explore this complicated tale together. What's the real cost of Russia's conflict in Ukraine? Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine has inflicted a substantial blow to its economic landscape, yielding far-reaching consequences that transcend the immediate combat zone. Financing such a drawn-out engagement mandates an extraordinary allocation of resources, compelling the Kremlin to undertake drastic measures that are progressively unsustainable. A pivotal element intensifying Russia's economic strain is its dual war funding approach. The official defense budget, estimated at $250 billion, is paralleled by a clandestine scheme where private banks are coerced into issuing preferential loans to defense contractors. These unsecured loans, totaling another $250 billion, essentially double the country's military outlay. As a result, Russia's gross domestic product expansion has markedly slowed, with the third quarter of 2024 recording a meager 3.1% increase, down from 4.1% in the prior quarter. This deceleration mirrors the burden of sustaining its war effort, which continues to demand extraordinary resource allocation, dwarfing usual peacetime expenditures and highlighting the growing financial burden on the Kremlin. Corporate debt has ballooned by 71%, reaching $415 billion, equivalent to 19% of Russia's gross domestic product. Many defense firms, already struggling with losses over the last 2 years, are now being propped up by these coerced loans. Craig Kennedy, a former banker and Russia analyst, emphasizes the dire state of Russia's economy in his recent report, highlighting a staggering 71% surge in corporate debt since 2022. This unparalleled growth dwarfs new household and government borrowing, painting a picture of a financial system increasingly reliant on unsustainable mechanisms to stay afloat. Inflation is another crucial problem, triggered by unchecked borrowing and rising war-related expenses. To stabilize the ruble, the central bank has elevated interest rates to 21%, a move that has stifled private sector growth. Businesses outside the defense sector face prohibitive borrowing costs, compounding the economic stagnation that threatens key industries such as manufacturing, agriculture, and consumer goods. This imbalance highlights how resources are increasingly being channeled toward military goals at the expense of economic diversity. Public sentiment in Russia is also beginning to mirror the strain of these policies. Ordinary citizens are growing alarmed by rumors of possible restrictions on bank deposits, a fear compounded by official denials that often fuel further anxiety. A member of the State Duma has proposed legislation requiring parliamentary approval before the central bank freezes personal savings, a move intended to reassure a nervous population. However, such actions may prove inadequate to restore confidence as economic instability continues to mount. The combined impacts of inflation, corporate debt, and the redirection of economic resources reveal the hidden costs of Russia's war in Ukraine. While the Kremlin tries to project resilience, these underlying weaknesses threaten to erode its ability to sustain the conflict. As financial pressures intensify, the risks of systemic collapse grow, further exposing the fragility of Russia's wartime economy. Is Russia's banking sector on the verge of a breakdown? Russia's banking sector, long viewed as a pillar of its economic stability, now teeters on shaky ground as the Kremlin's wartime policies strain financial institutions to their breaking point. The dual financing mechanism employed to sustain the war effort, involving both official budgets and covert bank loans, has created a ticking time bomb within Russia's financial system. A most concerning issue is the surge in corporate borrowing, which has reached a record $415 billion since mid-2022. Of this, an estimated 210 to 250 billion, or 21 to 25 trillion rubles, consists of compulsory loans to defense contractors. Craig Kennedy, a former investment banker and associate of the Davis Center, describes this strategy as a cornerstone of Russia's covert war financing. This off-budget financing, while supporting military production, has established a precarious financial ecosystem, burdening banks with high-risk liabilities and intensifying economic instability. Typically, banks evaluate a borrower's ability to repay before issuing credit, but in this situation, such due diligence has been discarded. Many of these defense contractors, already operating at a loss for consecutive years, lack the means to service these debts, leaving banks saddled with high-risk liabilities. The strain is further exacerbated by the central bank's aggressive monetary policies to combat inflation, fueled by preferential lending. Interest rates have been hiked to 20%. While this measure aims to stabilize the ruble, it has had severe repercussions for the private sector, making borrowing prohibitively expensive for businesses outside the defense industry. This has stifled growth and created a hostile economic environment for small and medium-sized enterprises, critical components of economic stability. Before we move further, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. It's very important for the channel's growth. Also, please write in the comments from which country you are watching us. We are very interested. And please watch this video to the end, because in the end we will draw conclusions. The public's confidence in the banking system is eroding. Fears of frozen deposits have spread among ordinary Russians, fueled by memories of past financial crises and ongoing economic uncertainty. Alexei Nechayev, a deputy of the State Duma, recently demanded legislation to ensure that any decision by the central bank regarding citizen savings would require prior parliamentary approval. He stated that any central bank decision about the savings of ordinary citizens can only be made with State Duma approval. However, analysts note that such a law is unlikely to be enacted, as authorities would need to act swiftly to implement any similar measures, reflecting the heightened anxieties surrounding Russia's banking sector. These developments reflect deeper systemic vulnerabilities within Russia's banking sector. By forcing banks to underwrite the war effort, the Kremlin has jeopardized the broader financial system's stability. Without substantial reforms or external relief, these cracks in the banking system could widen into a full-blown crisis, further undermining Russia's capacity to sustain its military and economic ambitions. How long can Russia survive without its oil revenue? Oil has long been the cornerstone of Russia's economy, funding its government expenditures and military operations. However, this critical revenue stream is under significant strain, with both internal and external forces disrupting the Kremlin's financial lifeline. The combination of Western sanctions, targeted Ukrainian strikes, and volatile global oil prices has created a perfect storm, threatening to erode Russia's economic foundation. One of the most immediate challenges comes from Ukraine's precision strikes on Russian oil infrastructure. Recent attacks on oil depots in the Voronezh and Krasnodar regions have not only damaged storage facilities, but also disrupted logistics vital to Russia's strategic bombing campaigns. Ukrainian forces have reportedly cut Russia's bombing capacity by 9,900 sorties, targeting the fuel sources necessary for its air operations. These strikes send a clear message that Ukraine can extend the battlefield into the heart of Russia's economic resources, forcing the Kremlin to divert additional resources to protect critical infrastructure. Sanctions imposed by Western nations have compounded these challenges. Recent measures targeting Russia's shadow fleet have stranded at least 65 oil tankers idling in waters near Russia, off Singapore's coast, and around Chinese ports, severely disrupting offshore crude exports. This logistical bottleneck is further aggravated by reduced global demand for Russian oil, as nations in Europe and elsewhere diversify their energy imports. The stranded tankers represent a tangible symbol of Russia's growing isolation in global energy markets, highlighting the effectiveness of coordinated international pressure. The volatility in oil prices adds another layer of complexity. Brent crude prices recently surged to over $81 per barrel as of early Monday, following a 3% increase on Friday, due to the expanded U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. This fluctuation underscores the precarious nature of Russia's reliance on fossil fuels as a cornerstone of its economy. The volatility in oil markets, influenced by geopolitical tensions and sanctions, highlights the vulnerabilities inherent in Moscow's dependence on this revenue stream. While facing mounting international pressure, these price swings are influenced by a mix of geopolitical tensions, production adjustments by OPEC+, and efforts by countries like Saudi Arabia to stabilize global markets. Despite these factors, Russia's limited ability to control or predict these dynamics leaves its economy exposed to external shocks. For a country that has converted much of its economy into a wartime footing, these disruptions carry profound implications. Oil revenues, which once accounted for about a third to a half of Russia's federal budget, are no longer a reliable source of income. The reduced inflow of funds not only undermines Russia's capacity to sustain its military campaign, but also exacerbates the strain on domestic programs already reeling from resource reallocation to the war effort. In the face of these mounting pressures, the Kremlin's options are limited. Efforts to find alternative buyers, such as expanding trade with China and India, have yielded mixed results. Both nations demand steep discounts, further eating into Russia's profit margins. Meanwhile, attempts to circumvent sanctions through shadow operations have proven increasingly risky and unsustainable. Ultimately, the siege on Russia's oil revenues is not merely an economic issue, but a strategic one. The degradation of this critical sector diminishes Russia's ability to project power and sustain its geopolitical ambitions. As the Ukraine conflict drags on, the Kremlin faces an uphill battle to stabilize its energy-dependent economy, making oil both a weapon and a vulnerability in this high-stakes confrontation. Has Russia lost its place on the global stage? Russia's war in Ukraine has not only weakened its economy, but has also significantly eroded its geopolitical influence. Historically regarded as a dominant power in regions like Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, Russia now finds itself increasingly isolated, as both traditional allies and global rivals capitalize on its vulnerabilities. A striking example of this isolation is Russia's deteriorating relationships in the Middle East. In Syria, where Moscow has long supported Bashar al-Assad's regime, Russian naval vessels have recently been barred from re-entering the Tartus base. This blockage has stranded equipment and troops, disrupting Moscow's ability to project power in one of its most strategically significant overseas bases. The inability to maintain logistical and military support in Syria highlights the growing limitations of Russia's reach. Russia's reputation as a reliable arms supplier, once a cornerstone of its foreign policy, has also taken a severe hit. High-profile failures of military hardware, such as the T-72 tanks and S-400 missile systems, have undermined confidence among traditional buyers. Nations like India and Egypt, which historically relied on Russian arms, are diversifying their defense procurement by turning to Western suppliers. This shift not only reduces Moscow's influence, but also threatens one of its most lucrative revenue streams. Western sanctions have further amplified Russia's geopolitical isolation. These measures have targeted key sectors like energy and technology, cutting off critical revenue and stifling its ability to sustain international ambitions. For instance, sanctions on Russia's shadow oil fleet have stranded dozens of tankers and disrupted 20% of offshore crude exports. This logistical bottleneck diminishes Russia's leverage in global energy markets and weakens its influence over energy-dependent nations. Meanwhile, NATO's expansion has drastically reshaped the security landscape in Europe. The inclusion of Finland and Sweden has fortified the alliance's eastern flank, reducing Russia's ability to exert pressure on its neighbors. Eastern European countries, particularly Poland and the Baltic states, have significantly bolstered their defenses, acquiring advanced military systems such as Patriot missiles and F-35 fighter jets. These developments demonstrate a collective resolve among Western nations to deter Russian aggression, further isolating Moscow diplomatically and militarily. Russia's diminishing influence is also evident in Central Asia, a region it once dominated. China has increasingly filled the void left by Russia's retreat, expanding its economic and diplomatic reach through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. Turkey, too, has capitalized on Russia's weakened position, strengthening ties with key players in the Middle East and Central Asia. This shift underscores the growing competition for influence in regions traditionally considered Moscow's backyard. In conclusion, Russia's geopolitical isolation is a direct consequence of its military setbacks, economic pressures, and the global response to its actions in Ukraine. Without significant reforms and a recalibration of its foreign policy, Russia risks losing its position as a major global power. The war has not only exposed the fragility of its geopolitical strategy, but has also accelerated its marginalization on the international stage. Is Putin losing the war at home? The prolonged war in Ukraine has created severe repercussions within Russia, amplifying the economic strain on its citizens and fostering widespread discontent. While the Kremlin attempts to project resilience, the domestic challenges stemming from this conflict are becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. One of the most significant issues facing ordinary Russians is the skyrocketing inflation that has eroded purchasing power. Prices for staples such as bread and fuel have surged, straining household budgets across the nation. The central bank's decision to raise interest rates to 21% in an attempt to stabilize the ruble has further compounded the financial burden. High borrowing costs have stifled business growth, particularly outside the defense sector, leaving many small and medium-sized enterprises struggling to survive. Wage stagnation adds another layer to this economic hardship. Coupled with rising costs, many Russians find themselves unable to afford basic necessities. This financial pressure has sparked growing anxiety about the security of personal savings. Reports of potential deposit freezes or restrictions on bank withdrawals have heightened public distrust in financial institutions. Alexei Navalny, a member of the State Duma, even proposed legislation to ensure parliamentary oversight before any such measures could be implemented. However, these reassurances have done little to quell fears among the populace. The war's impact on soldiers and their families is equally troubling. Thousands of troops have been killed or wounded, and returning veterans often report inadequate compensation and substandard medical care. These grievances echo those from historical conflicts, such as the Soviet-Afghan War, where dissatisfaction among soldiers contributed to broader societal unrest. The parallels to past failures underscore the Kremlin's inability to address these systemic issues effectively. Furthermore, the government's decision to redirect resources from social programs to military expenditures has weakened the nation's social safety nets. Pensions, healthcare, and education budgets have been slashed, leaving vulnerable populations particularly exposed. Low-income families and pensioners, who rely heavily on government support, are disproportionately affected, deepening the divide between the Kremlin and its citizens. Adding to these challenges is the memory of the Wagner Mutiny, which revealed cracks in Russia's internal stability. Though the rebellion was quelled, it highlighted the potential for unrest within both the military and civilian populations. Analysts warned that continued economic decline and dissatisfaction could ignite larger protests or even elite defections, further threatening Putin's grip on power. In conclusion, the domestic fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine is a growing challenge for the Kremlin. Inflation, resource misallocation, and public discontent are eroding confidence in the government's ability to manage the crisis. Without meaningful reforms, these pressures could escalate, jeopardizing both the stability of Putin's regime and the nation's long-term social cohesion. What can the world learn from Russia's mistakes? Russia's ongoing economic and military crisis underscores the profound consequences of unchecked aggression, systemic mismanagement, and over-reliance on outdated strategies. The war in Ukraine has not only laid bare Russia's vulnerabilities, but also provided critical insights for the global community on the dynamics of modern conflict and economic resilience. One of the most important lessons is the need for innovation and adaptability in both military and economic strategies. Russia's reliance on antiquated equipment, rigid military doctrines, and unsustainable economic policies has significantly hampered its effectiveness on the battlefield and its standing on the world stage. In contrast, Ukraine's ability to leverage modern technology coupled with strategic international partnerships has demonstrated how agility and cooperation can counter even a seemingly superior adversary. The crisis also highlights the power of sanctions and coordinated international action. Western sanctions, targeting Russia's energy exports, banking sector, and access to critical technologies, have compounded the Kremlin's difficulties, proving that economic measures can serve as powerful tools in geopolitical conflicts. This collective approach has not only isolated Russia, but also reinforced the importance of multilateralism in addressing global security challenges. Domestically, the situation in Russia is a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing military ambitions over economic stability and societal welfare. The redirection of resources to sustain the war effort has eroded public trust, strained social safety nets, and exacerbated inequality. These internal fractures suggest that sustainable governance requires balancing national security with the well-being of citizens. For the global community, Russia's predicament serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability, transparency, and collaboration. Supporting nations like Ukraine not only strengthens democratic principles, but also deters future acts of aggression. Moreover, fostering international dialogue and building resilient economic systems are critical to preventing similar crises from destabilizing other regions. Ultimately, the war in Ukraine underscores the interconnectivity of economic, military, and political stability in a globalized world. The lessons learned from this conflict must guide future policies, emphasizing the need for innovation, unity, and a steadfast commitment to peace and security. Only through collective effort can the international community address the challenges of the 21st century and build a more stable and equitable world. This channel's content is intended for informational and educational purposes only. While we strive to provide balanced analyses on political and military topics, the views expressed do not reflect those of any government organization or political entity. If this analysis has deepened your understanding of these critical issues, we encourage you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth discussions. And before you go, click on the video displayed on your screen to explore how geopolitical alliances are reshaping the global order. Together, let's stay informed, engaged, and committed to building a more peaceful world. Now let's discuss the conclusions. What have we learned? Conclusions, as promised at the end. We've witnessed a multi-layered conflict where the battlefield is only one aspect of a larger struggle. Russia's economic vulnerabilities are becoming increasingly apparent, driven by unsustainable wartime financing, inflation, and resource misallocation. The banking sector faces a systemic crisis, the energy sector is under siege, and geopolitical influence is waning. Internally, public discontent is growing due to economic hardships and the perceived mishandling of the war. The world is learning critical lessons about the importance of adaptability, international cooperation, and balanced governance. Russia's mistakes are a stark reminder that aggression and mismanagement can have dire consequences. It's crucial for the global community to promote accountability and work towards a more peaceful world.